Lost biker's daughter. Chose a random boy's hand. Later. Biker were in awe. The noise hit first. Engines, voices, radios crackling, boots on gravel, too much at once. A knot of bikes had stopped near the edge of the road, lights cutting through dusk, riders dismounting in practiced movements. Someone shouted a name, someone else swore. The air felt sharp, charged, like it would snap if touched wrong. In the middle of it all, she stood frozen. Not crying, not screaming. Just small against the chaos, eyes wide, breath shallow, hands clenched into the sleeves of a jacket that wasn't hers. Every voice sounded the same to her now, too loud, too close, too fast. Then she saw him. He wasn't calling out, wasn't moving toward her. He stood a few steps back from the circle, near a broken fence, hands at his sides, shoulders slightly hunched like he was used to taking up less space than he needed. His face was calm in a way that didn't demand anything. Her gaze locked onto him. Before anyone could react, before an order could be given, she took 2 unsteady steps forward and reached out. She chose his hand. The moment her fingers closed around his, the noise seemed to drop away, like someone had turned a dial down too far, too fast, and every biker on that road noticed. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. She hadn't meant to get lost. That was the part no one would believe later, when the story hardened into something easier to explain. It started with a stop that took too long and a door that closed too fast. It started with adults assuming someone else was watching. The road had been loud even before the bikes. A roadside diner, trucks idling, music spilling from an open door. She'd been told to stay put just for a minute, just until someone came back. Minutes stretch when you don't know how to measure them yet. People blur, sounds stack. By the time she realized the faces around her weren't familiar anymore, panic had already taken hold. Not sharp, not dramatic, but heavy, pressing in from all sides. She moved because standing still felt worse. She followed motion instead of direction, noise instead of sense. That was when the bikes arrived. They came fast and then stopped fast, engines roaring and cutting out in a way that made her flinch. Riders spread out, scanning, calling her name. Voices urgent but controlled. Too many eyes, too many hands ready to grab, to pull, to fix. Her chest tightened. Her breath wouldn't settle. She didn't know these people. All she knew was the sound, the size, the way the ground seemed to belong to them. Instinct told her to shrink, to back away, but there was nowhere to go without moving closer to the noise. And then there was the boy. He hadn't been part of the search. He hadn't been part of anything. He'd been there before the bikes, leaning against the fence, waiting for someone who was late in the way people always are. He'd watched the road out of habit, not expectation. When the chaos broke around him, he didn't step forward. He didn't step back. He just stayed where he was. That stillness cut through her panic like a hand through water. She didn't think. She chose. Her fingers wrapped around his hand, small and cold, gripping with the kind of certainty that comes from fear, finding something solid. He felt the tremor run through her before he heard the collective intake of breath around them. He looked down at her, surprised, then met her eyes. "It's okay," he said quietly. Not loud enough for anyone else, not a command, just a statement. Her breathing hitched once, then slowed. Around them, the world paused. A rider near the front took a step forward and stopped. Another lifted a hand, signaling restraint without words. Engines stayed off, radios went quiet. The man who had been calling her name, tall, broad-shouldered, vest marked by miles and stories, froze where he stood. His eyes moved from the girl to the boy, then down to their joined hands. Something unreadable crossed his face. "Easy," he said to no one in particular. The boy hadn't moved. His hand was warm now where hers clung to it, his pulse steady despite the weight of the moment settling over him. He could feel every eye on them, feel the air thicken with questions he didn't know how to answer. He didn't pull away. She leaned slightly toward him, not hiding, just anchoring. The noise didn't come back. It stayed held, suspended by an unspoken agreement that, whatever this was, it couldn't be rushed. A woman pushed through the line of riders, breathless, eyes bright with fear and relief. She stopped short when she saw them, confusion flickering across her face. "Oh," she said softly. The man stepped closer then, slow, deliberate, boots crunching on gravel. He stopped an arm's length away, towering and careful all at once. "Hey," he said to the girl, lowering himself slightly so his voice didn't loom. "You're all right. We've got you." She didn't let go of the boy's hand. Her grip tightened. The boy swallowed, heart pounding now, and looked up at the man. He expected anger, suspicion, something sharp. What he saw instead was calculation tempered by restraint. "She found him," someone murmured from the back. The man nodded once. "I see that." He shifted his stance, signaling to the others to hold. No one argued. They watched instead, curiosity edging into something else. Respect, maybe, or caution. "What's your name?" the man asked the boy. He answered without thinking. "Eli." "And you were here before we were," the man said. "Yes." "You know her?" Eli shook his head. "No." The man studied him a moment longer, then looked back at the girl. "You want to stay right there for a second?" She nodded, eyes never leaving Eli's face. "All right," the man said quietly. "That's what we'll do." No one touched her. No one tried to pry her hand free. The search didn't end, but it slowed, reshaped around the simple fact that whatever panic had been tearing through her had chosen its anchor. Eli felt the weight of it then, the attention, the responsibility, the way a single instinctive choice had shifted the balance of a moment that could have gone very differently. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know who they were. All he knew was that letting go now would feel like dropping something fragile. And judging by the looks on the riders' faces, they understood exactly what that meant. They didn't move for a long moment. The road stayed closed, not by barriers, but by attention. Riders stood where they were, engines dead, hands loose at their sides. Someone shifted their weight and stopped when a look passed down the line. The kind of look that didn't need a voice. Eli felt the girl's grip ease just enough to tell him she was breathing again. Not calm, steady. He angled his body slightly, putting himself between her and the loudest shapes without making it obvious. He had learned that trick early, protection that didn't announce itself. "Let's give her space," the man said quietly. It wasn't an order. It didn't need to be. A few riders stepped back a pace. Another turned off a headlight that was cutting across her eyes. The radio chatter stayed silent. The woman who had pushed through earlier wiped at her face and laughed once, thin and shaky. "You scared me," she said, half to the girl, half to herself. The girl didn't answer. She tightened her fingers around Eli's hand again, just a fraction, like she was testing whether the ground would hold. Eli looked down at her. "We're not going anywhere," he said, low enough that only she could hear. She nodded. The man, her father, though Eli didn't know it yet, watched the exchange closely. He took another careful step forward and stopped when the girl's shoulders stiffened. He noticed everything. The way her chin lifted when Eli spoke. The way her feet stayed planted. "Okay," he said, softer now. "We'll do this slow." Someone at the back cleared their throat. "We should call it in." "We did," the man replied. "Already done." Another voice. She wandered off near the diner. "I know," he said. "I was there." The girl's eyes flicked toward the diner sign down the road, then back to Eli. The noise there, trucks, laughter, music, felt far away now, like something she'd outgrown in minutes. A uniformed officer arrived and stopped short, reading the room before stepping in. He nodded to the man, then to the riders. "Found her?" "Yes," the man said. "She's safe." The officer crouched a little to bring his voice down. "Hey there," he said to the girl. "You all right?" She didn't answer him. She shifted closer to Eli. The officer paused, recalibrated. "That's okay," he said. "No rush." He looked up at the man. "We can clear the road if you want to move somewhere quieter." The man shook his head. "We're not moving her until she's ready." The officer nodded again. "Understood." Eli felt the weight of eyes settle on him. Not hard, not suspicious, but assessing. He kept his shoulders relaxed. He didn't try to explain himself. He'd learned that explanations invited questions, and questions came with hands. The man's gaze returned to him. "You said your name was Eli." "Yes." "You live around here?" Eli hesitated. "Close enough." The man nodded as if that was sufficient. "You didn't grab her." Eli shook his head. "She grabbed me." A few riders exchanged looks. Not disbelief, recognition. The woman from earlier stepped closer, keeping her distance. She does that, she said, when it's too much. The man closed his eyes for a beat, then opened them. All right. He turned to the line. We're going to walk back to the truck. Quiet. No rush. No one argued. They didn't move as a group. They thinned out, creating a corridor that wasn't obvious until it existed. Eli felt the girl's grip tighten as they took the first step. We can stop whenever you want, he said. She nodded again, eyes fixed ahead. They walked. Gravel crunched. A truck door opened and closed. Someone handed the man a bottle of water, which he held without offering yet. He watched the girl's breathing. He watched Eli's hands. Halfway there, she stopped. Eli stopped with her. He didn't turn. He waited. She leaned into his side, forehead brushing his arm, and took 2 slow breaths. The world stayed still around them, like everyone understood the pause mattered. When she moved again, it was with more confidence. At the truck, the man knelt, keeping his body small. We'll sit here for a minute, he said. Just us. She shook her head. Eli felt it before he understood it, the decision forming. You want to stay with me, he said, careful not to put words in her mouth. She nodded. The man looked at Eli then, really looked. The cut of his clothes, the scuffed shoes, the way he held himself like someone used to being overlooked. The man's jaw worked, then settled. All right, he said. You stay. A murmur rippled, then stilled. They sat on the tailgate. The girl swung her legs once, then tucked them in. Eli stayed close enough to be solid without crowding. The man offered the water. She took it with her free hand and drank, slow. What happened? The man asked, not pushing. She spoke quietly. Words clipped. A door, a wait, a turn that took too long. Faces she didn't know, the noise getting bigger instead of smaller. I didn't like it, she said simply. Eli nodded. Makes sense? The man exhaled, long. I'm sorry. She shrugged, then squeezed Eli's hand again. It's better now. That landed like a weight. The officer checked his watch. We can clear traffic when you're ready. Give us a minute, the man said. Eli's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. You hungry? Eli asked. She shook her head. No. Thirsty? She nodded once. He held the bottle while she drank again, careful not to tip it too fast. Around them, engines idled and cut as riders repositioned to keep the road calm. Someone cracked a joke far back and got a look that shut it down immediately. The man stood and faced the line. We're heading out. Same way we came. Thanks for keeping it clean. Helmets went on. Engines started low. He turned back to Eli. I'm going to need to take her home. Eli nodded. I know. The girl didn't let go. Eli felt his chest tighten. I'll walk with you to the cab. She considered, then nodded. They walked together the last few steps. When the door opened, she hesitated. Eli crouched to her height, voice steady. I'll be right here. She searched his face, then released his hand slowly, like testing gravity again. She climbed in. The door closed. The man rested a hand on the roof. You did good, he said to Eli. Not praise, a statement. Eli shrugged. I just stood there. The man met his eyes. That's rarer than you think. The convoy rolled out in pairs, engines a low thunder that faded down the road. The officer waved traffic through. The diner noise swelled back in. Eli stood alone by the fence again, hands empty, pulse finally slowing. A moment later, the truck braked and rolled back a few feet. The window came down. She leaned out just enough to be seen and lifted her hand. Eli lifted his. The truck pulled away for good this time. Eli leaned back against the fence, the quiet returning to its usual shape. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what he'd stepped into, but he knew one thing with certainty. Whatever came next, it wouldn't start with noise. It would start with remembering who had kept still when everything else moved. The road didn't forget him. Eli felt it the next day, even before anyone spoke his name. He stood near the fence again, same place, same posture, but the space around him behaved differently now. People passed and slowed without meaning to. A driver leaned out of a window and looked twice. A pair of riders rolled by, nodded once, and kept moving. He wasn't invisible anymore. He hadn't asked for that. He went back to waiting, because that was what he knew how to do. Waiting didn't mean doing nothing. It meant watching without staring, listening without leaning in. It meant letting the world show its seams. By late afternoon, the message arrived. Not a call, not a knock. A man stepped out of a truck that didn't look like it belonged to anyone important. He didn't wear leather, didn't wear a badge. He He walked like someone who had learned to be ignored when it suited him. "You're Eli," the man said, stopping a respectful distance away. Eli didn't answer immediately. He'd learned that names were currency. "Depends who's asking." The man smiled faintly. "Fair. I'm here to talk. Nothing more." Eli nodded toward the diner. "Then talk." They sat at opposite ends of a small outdoor table. The man didn't pull out a phone, didn't check the street. He rested his hands where Eli could see them. "You didn't move," the man said. "That mattered." Eli shrugged. "She asked me not to." "That's the part we're interested in," the man replied. "Why she trusted you." Eli frowned. "You'd have to ask her." The man shook his head. "We did." That landed heavier than Eli expected. "And?" Eli asked. The man leaned back slightly. "She said you didn't pull, you didn't crowd, you didn't try to solve anything." Eli looked down at the table. "I didn't know how." The man smiled again. This time, it reached his eyes. "Exactly." Eli felt a prickle of unease. "Who are you?" The man hesitated just long enough to be deliberate. "Someone who makes sure moments like yesterday don't get misunderstood." "That sounds like trouble," Eli said. "It can be," the man replied. "Or it can be closure." Eli met his gaze. "I didn't ask for anything." "I know," the man said. "That's why I'm here." They sat in silence for a moment. The diner door opened and closed behind them. Someone laughed too loud. The road breathed. "She's safe," the man said finally. "But shaken." Eli nodded. "She was scared." "Yes," the man replied. "And she still is." Eli felt his chest tighten. "I didn't make it worse." "No," the man said. "You made it quieter." The man stood. "You're going to hear stories about this. People will add weight to it, meaning you didn't put there." Eli looked up. "What am I supposed to do?" The man considered him for a long moment. "Nothing. Stay where you are. Stay who you are. And if someone comes asking questions, answer the ones you're asked," the man said. "Don't offer more." Eli nodded. That sounded like rules he could follow. Before leaving, the man added, "You should know. Her father noticed something else." Eli's pulse jumped. "What?" "That when she let go," the man said, "she didn't look back in fear. She looked back to check you were still standing." The man walked away then, blending into traffic, leaving Eli alone with a feeling he didn't have words for. That evening, Eli's phone buzzed for the first time since the road had quieted. Unknown number. He didn't answer. A message appeared instead. "Thank you for not rushing her." Eli stared at the screen, then set the phone face down. He didn't need thanks. He didn't know what to do with it. The next test came dressed as coincidence. 2 days later, a small group of riders stopped at the diner around dusk. Not together, not coordinated. They ordered food, sat apart, paid in cash. One of them dropped a fork and cursed softly. Another asked for napkins. Normal things. Eli watched from his place by the fence. None of them approached him. None of them avoided him either. When they left, one of the riders paused near him, helmet tucked under an arm. "You good?" the rider asked. Eli nodded. "Yeah." The rider studied him for a second, then smiled. "All right." That was it. No questions, no stories, just presence. Later that night, Eli lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling. He thought about how loud the world had been before she took his hand, how quiet it had become after. He understood something then that he hadn't before. Strength wasn't always about stepping forward. Sometimes it was about not stepping back. The road outside hummed with distant engines, not close enough to matter, not far enough to forget. Whatever had begun that day wasn't finished, but it was moving now, slow, deliberate, and aware of him. And for the first time in his life, Eli didn't try to disappear from it. The attention didn't come all at once. It arrived in fragments, small, almost polite disturbances that only mattered if you knew how to read them. Eli noticed the first one when he went to his usual spot by the fence the next afternoon. The broken slat had been fixed, not replaced, not reinforced, just nudged back into place, screws tightened. No reason for it to happen, no note, no explanation. Someone had been there. He rested his palm on the wood and felt the new grain where old rot used to be. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a gift. It was a reminder. Down the road, a pair of bikes rolled past at walking speed, riders upright, faces turned forward. They didn't look at him. That was the point. You don't look at what you already see. Eli stayed where he was. By evening, the diner filled the way it always did when something was off. People lingering longer than necessary, conversations stopping when doors opened, eyes tracking movement instead of menus. He ordered nothing, just took his seat near the window and let the glass reflect what the room pretended not to notice. Two men at the counter spoke low, voices carrying just enough. Never seen that many show up like that. Didn't even rev. Means something. Eli didn't turn. The door opened, bell chiming, and the sound of the room shifted. Not louder, more careful. A woman stepped in, jacket worn soft at the elbows, hair pulled back without fuss, eyes alert in a way that suggested she measured rooms before entering them. She ordered coffee, paid immediately, and chose a seat that gave her a clear view of both exits. She noticed Eli because she noticed everything. She waited until the room settled again, then stood and crossed the distance between them without hurry. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. Eli looked up. "Free country." She smiled faintly and took the chair opposite him. She didn't reach for his hand. She didn't lower her voice. "You didn't move," she said. Eli shrugged. "There wasn't anywhere to go." "There always is," she replied. "You just didn't take it." That earned her his attention. "Who are you?" he asked. "Someone who was asked to understand why 677 people listened to a moment instead of a voice," she said. Eli frowned. "I didn't tell anyone to do anything." "I know," she said. "That's why it worked." She took a sip of coffee, eyes never leaving his. "You're going to hear different versions of what happened." "I already have," Eli replied. "And you're going to be invited to explain yourself," she continued. "Gently, respectfully, privately." Eli leaned back. "I don't like private," she nodded. "Neither do we." A pause settled between them, thick with unspoken calibration. "They'll ask why she chose you," the woman said. Eli looked down at the table. "I didn't ask her to." "She'll tell them that," the woman replied. "But they'll still want to understand what kind of person doesn't flinch when a room gets loud." Eli let out a breath. "I flinched. I just didn't move." The woman smiled then. No warmth, no threat. Recognition. "Exactly." She stood and slid a card across the table. No logo, no title, just a number. "If anyone asks you to step into a room alone," she said, "you call that number first." "And if no one asks," Eli said. "Then you keep doing what you're doing," she replied. "Which is nothing." She left without waiting for an answer. That night, Eli walked home slower than usual. The streets felt different, not dangerous, not safe, aware, as if the city had learned a new word and was trying it out in its mouth. Halfway there, a voice called his name. He stopped. A man leaned against a parked truck, arms crossed, helmet hanging loose in one hand. His vest bore the wear of miles, not patches. His face was lined, eyes sharp. "You Eli?" the man asked. "Yes." The man nodded. "Name's Ross." They stood a few feet apart, neither claiming ground. "She talked about you," Ross said. Eli didn't ask who she was. Ross continued. "Said you didn't pull, didn't rush, didn't crowd." "That seems important to you," Eli said. Ross's mouth twitched. "It is." He shifted his weight. "People think strength is noise. They forget it's also restraint." Eli said nothing. Ross looked down the street, then back. "Some folks didn't like what yesterday meant." "What did it mean?" Eli asked. "That they don't get to decide every ending," Ross replied. Silence stretched. A car passed. Somewhere a radio played too loud. Ross straightened. "You're not in trouble." "That sounds like something people say before trouble," Eli replied. Ross smiled, brief and real. "Fair." He turned to go, then paused. "One more thing." Eli waited. "When she let go of your hand," Ross said, "she didn't look back because she was scared." Eli felt something tighten in his chest. "She looked back," Ross finished, "to make sure you were still there." The truck door closed. The engine started. Ross drove off without looking back. Eli stood there longer than he meant to. By the time he reached his door, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He didn't answer. A message appeared instead. "They'll ask you to explain courage. Don't. Just tell them what you did." Eli locked the phone and slipped it into his pocket. Inside, his apartment felt smaller than it had the day before. Not because it had changed, but because he had. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at his hands, remembering the weight of a smaller grip, the way the world had gone quiet without being told. He understood something now. That moment hadn't been about choice. It had been about capacity, the ability to stay when everything else demanded motion. And capacity, once revealed, draws attention the way heat draws cold. Outside, an engine passed, then another, both moving on. Eli lay back and closed his eyes. Whatever came next wouldn't ask him to be louder, it would ask him to be consistent. The test didn't come from the road, it came from the spaces in between. Eli felt it first when his phone rang, at a time it never rang. Mid-morning. No pattern. No reason. He stared at the screen until it stopped, then slipped the phone back into his pocket without checking the number. Silence, he'd learned, was only safe when you chose it. By noon, the diner felt watched without being occupied. People came in, ordered, stayed a little too long, then left without finishing what they'd started. The door chimed more often than usual. Each time, Eli's shoulders tightened a fraction, then settled again. He stayed where he was. The woman from the previous day didn't return. Neither did Ross. That absence was intentional. The kind of space people leave when they want to see what you do without them. Mid-afternoon, the invitation arrived. Not a letter, not a knock, a text. Coffee? My treat. Public place, no name, no threat, just an offer shaped like courtesy. Eli showed it to the empty table across from him, then slipped the phone away. He didn't reply. An hour later, a second message followed. Not an interrogation, just want to hear your side. That one stayed on the screen longer. He could feel the shape of it, reasonable, clean, designed to make refusal feel rude. He finished his water, stood and left the diner without telling anyone where he was going. The park 2 blocks away was loud enough to hide conversations. Kids on swings, dogs pulling at leashes, music drifting from someone's phone. He sat on a bench where he could see both paths and waited. She arrived exactly on time. Not the woman from before, someone else. Mid-length coat, hair tied back, carrying herself like she belonged anywhere she stood. She didn't scan the park. She spotted him immediately. Eli, she said, stopping a respectful distance away. He didn't stand. You found me anyway, she smiled. You didn't make it hard. That wasn't an invitation. No, she agreed. It was a choice. She sat on the far end of the bench, leaving space between them like she understood its value. She didn't pull out a phone, didn't set a recorder on the table. She rested her hands on her knees where he could see them. I'm not here to argue facts, she said. Those are being handled. Eli looked at the path instead of her. Then why are you here? To understand the variable, she replied. He snorted quietly. I'm not a variable, she nodded. That's what worries people. A group of teenagers ran past, laughing too loud, unaware of the quiet pressure settling on the bench. People are asking why she chose you, the woman continued. They want something they can categorize. She didn't choose me, Eli said. She grabbed the first hand that wasn't reaching for her. That's a distinction without difference to people who need explanations, she replied. He finally looked at her. What explanation do you want? She met his gaze evenly. That you were scared too. That you froze. That this was an accident of proximity. Eli felt a flicker of irritation. I didn't freeze. I know, she said. But that's the version that closes the file. There it was. Clean. Honest. Dangerous. And if I don't give it to you, she tilted her head, then the story stays open longer. That's supposed to scare me. No, she said softly. It's supposed to tire you. Eli leaned back, eyes on the sky. You could have said all this over text, she smiled faintly. You wouldn't have felt the weight. He stood. She didn't follow. Think about it, she said. Being ordinary again has value. He looked down at her. Ordinary doesn't knock like it owns the place. Her smile faded just a touch. Careful. Why? Because some people mistake consistency for defiance. Eli shrugged. That's their problem. He walked away without waiting for permission. The next morning, the tone shifted. Not in public. In logistics. His usual bus was late, then didn't come at all. The clerk at the corner store asked for ID she'd never asked for before. A teacher at school called him into the office and asked if everything was all right at home, voice too careful, eyes flicking to the door. I'm fine, Eli said. The teacher nodded. Just checking. By afternoon, a notice went out. Community listening session, road safety and youth well-being. No names, no accusations. A soft net cast wide enough to catch him without admitting it. Lena found him by the fence before he could decide whether to go. "You don't have to attend," she said. "I know. But they want you to." "I know." She studied his face. "What are you thinking?" "That they want me to talk myself smaller," he replied. She nodded. "And will you?" "No." The session took place in a school gym that smelled like dust and old banners, folding chairs, a long table at the front, people who introduced themselves with first names only. Eli sat in the back. A moderator spoke about safety, about confusion, about the importance of adult guidance. Experts talked about fear responses, about sensory overload, words stacked until they almost meant something. Then a hand went up. "Can we hear from the boy?" someone asked. Eli felt the room turn. He stood slowly. He didn't walk to the front. He stayed where he was. "I didn't do anything special," he said. His voice carried without effort. "I stood still because moving felt wrong." A murmur rippled. The moderator smiled. "That's very humble." "It's accurate," Eli replied. Another hand. "Were you frightened?" "Yes," he said. "But fear isn't an excuse to push." The room went quiet. "That's all," Eli said, and sat back down. No applause, no pushback, just a recalibration. Outside, as people filtered out, a few riders stood near the edge of the parking lot, talking quietly, not watching him, not avoiding him, just there. Lena touched his arm. "They didn't get what they wanted." "They got what they needed," Eli replied. "To hear it out loud." She smiled. "That's worse for them." That night his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time he answered. "You had a chance to simplify this," the voice said. Eli leaned against the wall. "I did. You chose not to. I chose not to lie." Silence. "You're consistent," the voice said finally. "Not approval, assessment?" "Yes." The call ended. Eli slid the phone back into his pocket and stood by the window. Outside, a bike rolled past, then another, then none. He understood now. They weren't testing his courage. They weren't testing his loyalty. They were testing his endurance. And endurance, once proven, has a way of outlasting pressure without ever raising its voice. The night after the session, the city pressed back. Not with noise, with procedure. Eli felt it before he understood it. The way the air in his apartment seemed thinner when he woke. The way his phone sat heavier on the table, as if it had learned a new purpose while he slept. The message came just after sunrise. "We need to speak with you. Today. Please confirm availability. No name, no threat, just the assumption that time belonged to them." He didn't answer. He dressed, moved through the apartment, checked the window out of habit. Nothing unusual. No cars idling too long. No shadows where they didn't belong. That was the problem. Pressure that announced itself could be prepared for. This kind was designed to pass as normal. Down the street, the diner opened like it always did. Same bell, same smell of coffee and oil. The owner nodded at him, but her eyes lingered a second longer than usual, then moved away. "Everything all right?" she asked too casually. Eli nodded. "Yeah?" She accepted that the way people do when they don't believe you but don't want to argue. Lena arrived a few minutes later. She didn't sit right away. She stood near the window, watching the street, reading patterns only she could see. "They're going to formalize this," she said. Eli stirred his coffee. "They already tried." "That was social," she replied. "This will be administrative." As if summoned, his phone buzzed again. Same number. He slid it across the table to her. She didn't touch it. "They want to take control of the timeline." "I don't have to give it to them," Eli said. "No," she agreed, "but they'll try to take it anyway." They didn't wait long. Two people arrived at the diner just before noon. Not together, not obviously connected. One ordered food and sat near the back. The other stood near the door pretending to read a notice about hours. Eli felt it in his shoulders, the old instinct to shrink, to disappear. He didn't. The one by the door turned and approached, badge finally visible when it mattered. "Eli," he said, "mind stepping outside for a moment?" Lena's chair scraped softly as she turned. "Why?" The man smiled politely. "Routine follow-up." Eli stood. "Say it here." The man hesitated, recalibrating. We'd prefer privacy. Eli met his eyes. Put it in writing. A flicker of irritation crossed the man's face before it smoothed out again. We're trying to make this easier for you. That's never how it starts, Eli replied. The second person stood now too, food untouched. You've been identified as a central witness, she said. There are protocols. Whose? Lena asked. They didn't answer that. We're requesting a recorded statement, the first man said. Today. Eli shook his head. I've already given one. This would be supplemental. Put it in writing, Eli repeated. Silence stretched. Diners nearby pretended not to listen. The woman nodded once. We'll be in touch. They left without another word. Lena exhaled slowly. They wanted you alone. Eli nodded. They don't like witnesses having witnesses. Outside, engines rolled past again, not clustering, not stopping. A reminder written in motion. The afternoon brought the next layer. A notice was posted online about a temporary adjustment to pedestrian access near the fence where Eli usually waited. Construction, safety, the usual words. The fence wasn't broken. It hadn't been dangerous before. They're shrinking your space, Lena said. Eli read the notice twice. They want me off that corner. Yes, she replied, because that's where she found you. By evening, the rumor shifted again. Now it wasn't about fear or influence. It was about motive. Why was he there? Why hadn't he moved sooner? Why did she choose him? The questions didn't accuse. They implied. Eli sat on the steps outside his building, notebook open but unused, listening to voices carried down the block. They're trying to turn curiosity into suspicion, he said. Lena nodded. That's how they keep their hands clean. A bike slowed near the curb, then kept going. Another followed, then none. They're watching the watchers, Lena added. Eli looked up at her. Does that help? It keeps things from getting sloppy, she said. That night, the call finally came with a name attached. Eli, the voice said, calm, professional. This is Director Harris with Community Services. Eli leaned back against the wall. What do you want? To ensure your well-being, Harris replied. You've been through something disruptive. Eli waited. We're recommending a short relocation, Harris continued, just until things settle. Eli closed his eyes. No. A pause. You should consider it. I have, Eli said. And no. Harris sighed softly. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Eli opened his eyes. For who? Silence. We're concerned you're being used, Harris said. Eli laughed once, quiet and sharp. Then you should ask who tied her up. Harris didn't respond immediately. That line of inquiry is ongoing, Harris said finally. Eli nodded. So is my answer. The call ended. Lena had been listening without interrupting. That was the escalation. What comes after? Eli asked. She met his eyes. They try to remove choice. The next morning, they tried. A formal letter arrived at his door. Printed, official, heavy with authority, mandatory assessment. Failure to comply may result in further action. Eli read it once, then handed it to Lena. They didn't ask, he said. No, she replied. They assumed. Eli felt the old instinct surge, the urge to comply just to make the pressure stop. He breathed through it. What happens if I don't go? He asked. They push, Lena said, harder, louder. And if I do? They decide what you are, she replied. Without you in the room. Eli folded the letter carefully. Then I don't go. Lena nodded. Then we document. By noon, the bikes appeared again. Not en masse, not dramatic. Individuals at corners, familiar shapes, familiar restraint. The city noticed. Phones came out. Conversations stalled. An official car slowed, then drove on. Eli stood at the fence, construction tape fluttering uselessly behind him, and felt something settle into place. This wasn't about bravery. It wasn't about defiance. It was about refusing to let procedure replace truth. Lena stood beside him, quiet. They'll try one more time, she said. Eli looked down the street, empty now except for distance. Then we'll still be here. The wind moved the tape. The fence held. And for the first time since she'd taken his hand, Eli understood what the road had been testing all along. Not whether he would stand up, but whether he would stay. They moved fast once he refused, not loud fast, administrative fast. By mid-morning, the letter had already been logged, referenced, and echoed back at him in 3 different forms. An email from Community Services following up. A voicemail marked urgent but spoken calmly. A second envelope slid under his door with the same language reworded, as if repetition could become authority. Eli laid them out on the table without opening the last one. Paper liked to pretend it was heavier than people. Lena watched him from the doorway, arms folded, eyes sharp. "They're building a trail," she said, "so later they can say you ignored help." "I didn't," Eli replied. "I declined it," she nodded. "They don't like that word." Outside, the construction tape fluttered uselessly against the fence. No workers, no tools, just the suggestion of restriction where none had existed before. Caleb arrived without calling. He didn't knock. He stood in the hall long enough to be seen, then waited until Eli opened the door. "They're coordinating now," Caleb said, stepping inside. "Services, city, a consultant I don't recognize." Eli sat back down. "What kind?" "The kind that specializes in compliance without force," Caleb replied. "They convince other people to do the pushing." As if summoned by the sentence, footsteps sounded in the hall again. Different rhythm this time, confident, unhurried. Caleb didn't reach for the door. "You want me to?" Eli shook his head. "No, they're here for me." He opened it. A man stood there alone, no badge visible, no folder, just a neutral jacket and a practiced expression that had learned how to survive scrutiny. "Eli," the man said, "I appreciate you taking a moment." "I didn't," Eli replied. "You came anyway." The man smiled faintly. "Fair." He gestured to the hallway. "May I come in?" Eli didn't move. "Say it here." The man glanced past him, registered Lena without surprise, then nodded. "All right." He folded his hands loosely. "I'm here to clarify expectations." Eli leaned against the doorframe. "Whose?" "The city's," the man said. "And yours." "That sounds convenient." "It's meant to be," the man replied. "Look, this has outgrown the moment. That happens. What matters now is containment." Lena's voice cut in, calm and cold. "Containment of what?" The man met her gaze. "Of risk." "Risk to who?" Eli asked. The man hesitated just long enough to answer honestly. "To everyone who didn't plan for you." That landed. "We're offering a path that reduces escalation," the man continued. "Compliance now prevents complications later." Eli studied him. "You want me to submit?" "I want you to cooperate," the man corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Eli asked, "when the alternative is removal?" The man didn't deny it. "Temporary relocation is still on the table." Eli nodded slowly. "Then put it in writing." The man's smile thinned. "You know why we don't." "Because it won't hold up," Eli said. Silence stretched in the hall. Behind them, a door opened. A neighbor stepped out, paused, and listened without pretending not to. The man exhaled. "You're forcing our hand." Eli shrugged. "You brought it." The man stepped back. "You'll hear from us again." "I know," Eli replied. When the door closed, the hall felt louder than before. Lena crossed the room and picked up the unopened envelope. She turned it over, then set it down. That was the last polite version. "What's next?" Eli asked. Caleb answered from the window. "They try to move you with optics." As if on cue, the headline appeared an hour later. Not accusatory. Concerned. "Officials seek to support individual at center of ongoing incident." No name, no denial, just implication wrapped in empathy. "They're painting you as fragile," Lena said. "So any resistance looks unreasonable." Eli rubbed his face. "I'm tired." "That's the point," Caleb replied. By late afternoon, the bikes returned, not as a gathering, not as a line. They appeared where pressure had been applied, one at the fence, two at the end of the block. A few parked across the street, engines off, riders talking quietly with shop owners who nodded and listened. The city noticed. A patrol car slowed, then kept going. Phones came out, then went away. The man from earlier stood across the street now, pretending to check messages. He looked up, took in the scene, and frowned. "This wasn't supposed to be visible," he muttered into his phone. Lena smiled without humor. "That's where you miscalculated." Evening brought the official escalation. A city notice posted online. mandatory assessment scheduled for the next morning. Eli read it once. They scheduled it, he said, didn't ask. Caleb nodded. They're counting on compliance fatigue. Lena met Eli's eyes. If you don't go, they'll say you're uncooperative. And if I do, Eli said, they decide what I am. She nodded. Exactly. Outside, engines idled and cut, idled and cut. A rhythm, not a threat, a signal. Eli stood and picked up the notebook. I'm not going, he said. Caleb didn't argue. Lena didn't hesitate. Then we don't disappear, she said. We stay exactly where they can see us. That night the message came again. Same number as before. Shorter this time. This is your last chance to make it easy. Eli typed nothing. He turned the phone off and set it face down. They sat by the window together as darkness settled. The street held its breath. Somewhere far off, a group of bikes rolled past and vanished into distance. Lena broke the silence. They don't know what to do with someone who refuses to be categorized. Eli nodded. Neither do I. She looked at him then, really looked. You don't need to be loud tomorrow. I know. You just need to be present. I know. Midnight passed without incident. No knock, no sirens, no sudden movement, just waiting. Eli lay back on the couch and stared at the ceiling, feeling the strange calm that comes when the choice is already made. Whatever tomorrow brought, it wouldn't be because he failed to comply. It would be because he chose to remain. And that, he understood now, was the one thing pressure couldn't rewrite. The morning of the assessment arrived without ceremony. No sirens, no escort, just a pale sky and a city pretending the calendar mattered more than the choices already made. Eli woke before his alarm and didn't turn it off. He lay still, listening to the building breathe, pipes clicking, a door closing somewhere down the hall, a car starting and moving on. Everything ordinary, everything tense. The notice sat on the table where he'd left it, folded once, edges sharp, words heavy with the kind of authority that wanted obedience more than understanding. Lena was already dressed. She stood by the window, jacket on, chair close but untouched, posture steady in a way that told him she'd slept less than he had. They'll be watching who comes and goes, she said. They'll count footsteps. Eli sat up. Then we don't go, she nodded. Then we don't hide either. Caleb arrived just after sunrise. He didn't knock. He stood in the hall until Eli opened the door, the way people do when they don't want to surprise you. They've staged it, Caleb said. Media's been tipped without names. The idea is compliance theater. Eli rubbed his face. They want me to walk into a room so they can frame it. Yes, Caleb replied, and if you don't, they'll say you refused help. Eli looked at the notice again. They already say that. Lena crossed the room and folded the paper tighter. Then we let them say it where everyone can hear. Outside, the first bikes appeared. Not a flood, not a rally, one here, two there. Riders parking legally, dismounting, leaning against storefronts, sitting on low walls like they had nowhere better to be. Helmets off, engines quiet. The city noticed. A patrol car slowed, then moved on. A second circled the block without stopping. They're placing witnesses, Lena said. Caleb nodded. Exactly. By 9, the assessment office had called twice. By 10, 3 times. By 11, the tone changed from polite to insistent. Eli let it ring. At noon, someone knocked. Not the apartment door. The building's front entrance. Lena went still. Caleb shifted to the side, not blocking, not retreating. Eli walked down the stairs and opened the door to find 2 officials standing just inside the lobby. One held a clipboard. The other wore a practiced expression that suggested this wasn't her first attempt at persuasion. Eli, she said, we're here to escort you. He didn't step aside. I declined. This isn't optional, the clipboard man said. Eli looked past them. Through the glass doors, the street was full of quiet shapes. Bikes parked at intervals, people talking softly, phones in hands but not raised. Put it in writing, Eli said. The woman exhaled slowly. You're making this difficult. Eli nodded. That's what you said last time. She glanced at the street and hesitated, just long enough. This isn't how this ends well, she said. Eli leaned against the doorframe. You don't get to choose that. The clipboard man lowered his voice. If you don't come, we document refusal. Do that, Eli said, accurately. Silence pressed in around them. From outside, a voice carried, not loud, not confrontational. "Everything all right in there?" One of the riders stood near the entrance, hands visible, posture relaxed, not addressing the officials, addressing the situation. The woman's jaw tightened. "We'll be in touch," she said. They left without another word. The door closed. The lobby exhaled. Upstairs, Lena let out a breath she'd been holding too long. They didn't expect that. Caleb checked his phone. They're adjusting. The adjustment came fast. A statement appeared online within the hour. Individual at center of incident declines recommended assessment. No context, no explanation, just implication. Eli read it once. They want this to look irresponsible. Yes, Lena replied, so later they can say they tried. And did they? Eli asked. She met his eyes. Only if you believe help comes without consent. Outside, the bikes shifted, not clustering, not dispersing, just repositioning where pressure had been applied, a visual rebuttal without a word spoken. By mid-afternoon, reporters arrived, not swarming, waiting. One asked Lena a question she didn't answer. Another asked Caleb if this was intimidation. He smiled and said nothing. Eli stayed inside, visible through the window, doing nothing dramatic. That was the most dramatic thing he could do. Late afternoon brought the call that mattered, not from community services, not from the city, from the inquiry. A calm voice, clear questions, no leading language. We've reviewed the relocation and assessment requests, the voice said. They don't align with current findings. Eli closed his eyes. We're issuing a directive, the voice continued. No further action without cause, documented cause. Caleb mouthed. That's it. Lena sat down slowly. Thank you, she said into the phone, for saying it out loud. When the call ended, the room felt lighter, not safe, but honest. Outside, the bikes began to roll out, not all at once, not together, each rider choosing the moment, engines starting low, moving on. The city watched them go. Eli stood by the window until the street looked normal again. They'll try something else, he said. Yes, Lena replied, but not today. He nodded. Today counts. As evening fell, the assessment notice vanished from the city site, replaced by a quiet update. Process under review, no apology, no admission. Enough. Eli sat on the couch, exhaustion finally catching up. Lena rested nearby, eyes closed, breathing even. Caleb leaned against the wall, arms crossed, satisfied in a way that didn't need celebration. For the first time since she'd taken his hand, there was nothing to respond to. No knock, no call, no demand. Just the quiet after a decision that couldn't be undone. Eli understood something then that he hadn't before. Pressure doesn't break people all at once. It waits for permission, and today, without raising his voice or stepping forward, he had refused to give it any. Tomorrow would bring consequences, adjustments, attempts at reframing. But tonight, the city had learned something it wouldn't forget easily. You can't manage what refuses to move, and you can't relocate a line once it's been drawn in daylight. The city didn't push back right away. That was how Eli knew the pressure hadn't lifted. It had recalculated. The morning after the assessment attempt failed, things looked normal enough to fool anyone who hadn't been paying attention. Traffic flowed. Construction tape near the fence came down quietly, without workers or notice. The diner opened on time. People ordered coffee and complained about prices like nothing had ever paused. But the pauses were still there, tucked into the spaces between actions. Eli felt them when he stepped outside and noticed the absence of the bikes, not because they were gone, but because they were gone on purpose. No silhouettes at the corners, no quiet witnesses. The street was suddenly his again, and that felt heavier than company. They're letting the city breathe, Lena said, watching from the window, so it can decide what it remembers. Caleb checked his phone and shook his head slowly. They're shifting the fight to paperwork and timing. Eli sat on the steps and opened the notebook without writing. He scanned the pages, not for facts, he already knew them, but for patterns. Pressure had a rhythm. Once you heard it, you could tell when it was about to change tempo. By late morning, the first consequence surfaced where it hurt least and mattered most. School. Not a call demanding he come in, not an accusation, an email with a subject line that sounded helpful. Scheduling adjustment request. He read it once, then again. They wanted to discuss accommodations. A quiet meeting, a chance to reduce disruption. Words chosen to sound considerate while removing friction. "They're trying to sideline you," Lena said when he showed her. Eli nodded. "Same play, different room." "Will you go?" Caleb asked. Eli thought about it, about refusing, about complying, about how both choices could be used against him if framed correctly. "Yes," he said, "but not alone." The office smelled like lemon cleaner and paper. The counselor smiled too fast. The administrator folded hands like a shield. "We just want to make sure you're supported," the counselor said. Eli sat straight. "Put it in writing," the administrator blinked. "This is informal." Eli didn't raise his voice. "Then there's nothing to decide." They tried again, talked about stress, about distraction, about how much attention could be overwhelming. Eli waited, then said, "You're worried I'll keep being noticed." Silence followed, not denial. Calculation. "We're worried about outcomes," the administrator said finally. "So am I," Eli replied. "That's why I'm staying where I am." He left with no agreement and no consequences. Yet. By afternoon, the second consequence arrived through reputation. A local column posted a piece that didn't name him, didn't accuse him, didn't lie. It wondered whether the attention around the incident had created unintended pressure on someone who might not be equipped to handle prolonged scrutiny. The comment section did the rest. People argued, some defended, others speculated. Eli closed it without scrolling. "They're trying to make concern do the work fear couldn't," Lena said. Eli nodded. "Concern is quieter." "And stickier," Caleb added. The third consequence came where Eli didn't expect it, at the fence. He returned there near sunset, the place where it had started, the place where standing still had mattered. The repaired slat was gone now, not broken, removed, cleanly. Someone had taken it, not vandalism, not warning, a gap. He rested his hand on the empty space and felt the message in it. "You're exposed now." Behind him, footsteps approached. He didn't turn. "You're not wrong to be here," a voice said. He recognized Ross's cadence before he turned. Ross stood a few feet away, helmet under his arm, eyes steady. He looked tired in a way that came from watching things move instead of riding them. "They're going to try to wait you out," Ross continued. "Make this boring. Make it long." Eli nodded. "I can wait," Ross studied him. "That's what worries them." "Why?" Eli asked. "Because waiting is something they usually own," Ross replied. They stood in silence for a moment, the road humming beyond them. "People think the bow was the end," Ross said. "It wasn't. It was a signal." "To who?" Eli asked. "To the ones who know how to read restraint," Ross replied, "and to the ones who don't." He adjusted his grip on the helmet. "You should know. Some folks are unhappy." Eli smiled faintly. "I figured." "They'll try one last frame," Ross said. "Make you the reason this went public." Eli looked at the empty fence slat. "It did go public." "Yes," Ross said, "but they want it to look like your fault." Ross stepped back. "You didn't do anything wrong." "That hasn't stopped anyone before," Eli replied. Ross smiled briefly. "True." He turned to leave, then paused. "If it helps, she's doing all right." Eli's shoulders eased without his permission. "I'm glad." Ross nodded and walked away. That night the city tried to settle again. The bikes didn't return, the phones didn't ring, the headlines slowed. But underneath the calm, Eli felt it, the pressure coiling for one more push. He wrote a single line in the notebook before closing it. "They're going to make it about me." Lena read it over his shoulder. "They already did." And, she met his eyes, and it didn't work. The final consequence arrived just before midnight, a notice from the inquiry. Not dramatic, not loud. Request for public clarification. They wanted to release a summary. They wanted a statement, not an interview, not a defense, just words on record that couldn't be edited later. Caleb read it twice. "They're closing the loop," Eli exhaled slowly. "Good," Lena nodded. "This is where memory becomes history." Eli looked at the notebook, then closed it for the last time that night. "Then let's say it once," he said, "and be done." Outside, the city slept, not because it was safe, but because for the first time in days nothing was being forced. And in the quiet, Eli understood something essential. Pressure only wins when it convinces you to move before you choose to. Tonight, it had nowhere left to push. The clarification went out at noon. No live stream, no press scrum. Just a document posted where documents lived, written in the dry language of people who knew every word would be read for what it did not say as much as for what it did. Eli read it once, then again, slowly. It laid out the sequence, the moment she was lost, the search, the pause, the choice. It acknowledged the presence of many witnesses without naming them. It confirmed there was no evidence of coercion, influence, or manipulation by the boy who had stood still. It stated plainly that the selection of his hand had been initiated by the individual seeking safety. It did not praise him. It did not minimize him. It placed him exactly where he belonged, in the record. "That's it," Caleb said quietly when Eli set the phone down. "They can't move you now," Lena nodded. "They've anchored the truth." The city reacted the way cities do when a line becomes permanent, not with celebration, with acceptance. By mid-afternoon, the tone online shifted again. The careful concern pieces stopped. The speculative threads went quiet. A few accounts deleted posts without comment. Others doubled down, but without traction. The noise thinned, then dispersed. Pressure, when it loses leverage, becomes background. Eli felt it lift in small ways. A bus arrived on time. The clerk at the corner store smiled without calculation. A teacher passed him in the hall and nodded once, no questions attached. He returned to the fence as the sun dipped, the place that had become an axis without asking permission. The missing slat was still gone, leaving a narrow gap where his hand had rested days ago. Someone had left something there, not fixed, not replaced. A strip of chalk wedged carefully into the space. No words, no symbol. Just a marker that could be erased when the rain came. Eli touched it and left it where it was. Behind him, footsteps approached, measured, familiar. Ross stopped a few feet away, helmet hooked at his side. "They closed it," he said. "Yes," Eli replied. Ross looked at the street, then back at the fence. "Some people are upset." Eli shrugged. "Some always are," Ross nodded. "Others are relieved." "That matters more." Ross's mouth curved briefly. "It does." They stood there a moment longer, watching the road fill and empty again like it always had. "You won't hear from them anymore," Ross said. "Not the ones who knock wrong." Eli didn't ask how he knew. "Good." Ross shifted his weight. "There's something else." Eli waited. "They wanted a statement from her," Ross continued. "She declined anything that wasn't written." Eli's shoulders eased. "That sounds like her." "She asked that they include one line," Ross added. "What line?" Ross looked at him directly. "That she chose quiet because it stayed." Eli felt the words settle, not heavy, not light. Right. That evening the bikes appeared again, not many, not announced. They rolled through the city in small numbers, riders stopping at lights, waiting their turn, blending into traffic like they belonged there. Which they did. One bike paused at the intersection near the diner. The rider removed his helmet, rested it on the tank, and looked toward the fence. He didn't nod. He didn't wave. He simply waited through the red light without moving. When it turned green, he rode on. Eli understood the gesture. It wasn't recognition. It was confirmation. The night passed without incident. No calls, no visits, no requests for explanation. For the first time since she'd taken his hand, there was nothing left to manage. The following morning, the city woke to the story being over. Not resolved, not celebrated. Just done. Eli packed his bag for school and stopped, hand resting on the notebook. He opened it once more, not to add anything, but to read the first line he'd written days ago, back when pressure had felt like a ceiling. "She chose my hand." He closed the book and left it on the desk. At the diner, Lena waited near the window, jacket folded beside her chair. She looked rested now, not healed, but aligned. "I'm leaving today," she said without preamble. Eli nodded. "Figured." "Not running," she added, "just continuing." He smiled faintly. "That sounds right." She reached into her pocket and placed a folded card on the table. No logo, just a number. "For noise," she said, "not emergencies." He took it. "I know." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the street live its unremarkable life. "You know," Lena said, "they kept asking me why I trusted you." Eli looked up. "What did you say?" "That you didn't try to be anything," she replied. "You just stayed." He considered that. "That's not much." "It's everything when everything else moves," she said. They stood to leave together, then stopped at the door. "This is where it stays quiet," Lena said. Eli nodded. "That's where I do best." She smiled, small, real, and turned toward the street that led away from town. He watched her go without following. The road absorbed her the way it absorbed everyone who didn't need to be chased. Eli stood there a moment longer, then stepped back inside, the bell chiming once behind him. The city moved on. The fence stayed broken. The line remained. And for the first time since the noise had fallen away, Eli understood what the bikers had seen when they'd bowed. Not a hero, not a story, but a point of stillness strong enough to hold the world in place for one breath. That was awe. Not loud, not visible, but unmistakable once you knew how to look. The city learned how to live with the story the way it lives with everything else, by folding it into routine. A week passed without incident, then another. The diner kept its hours, the fence stayed broken, the chalk disappeared after rain and reappeared once, thinner, like someone had traced the idea rather than the line. Eli noticed how people approached him now, not the stares from before, not the careful avoidance either. Something in between. A pause before speaking. A question left unasked. The respect of distance. It was heavier than attention had ever been. He sat on the steps one afternoon, notebook closed beside him, when a familiar bike rolled in and stopped cleanly at the curb. No engine rev. No announcement. Ross dismounted and leaned the bike onto its stand with the ease of repetition. "You've been quiet," Ross said. "That's normal for me," Eli replied. Ross smiled faintly. "Not like this." They watched traffic move for a while. A delivery truck double-parked. A horn sounded and was ignored, life refusing to become symbolic again. "They wrapped it up," Ross said finally. Eli nodded. "I saw." "They didn't like the wording," Ross continued, tried to soften it. "Did it work?" "No," Ross said. "Too many eyes." Eli exhaled slowly. "Good." Ross shifted his weight. "There's a gathering tonight." Eli glanced at him. "For what?" Ross looked down the block. "Closure." That word carried more than it sounded like it should. "I don't need to be there," Eli said. Ross met his gaze. "No, but you're invited." Night settled clean and cool, the kind that made the streetlights feel earned. When Eli arrived, the space was already set without being arranged, bikes parked in loose arcs, riders standing in small groups talking quietly, laughing at things that didn't matter. No crowd, no spectacle. Lena was there. She stood near the edge, jacket on, chair beside her but unused. She looked different again, not guarded, not relieved, aligned. "You came," she said. "I was nearby," Eli replied. She smiled at the answer. "Of course you were." Caleb stood with a few others, posture relaxed for the first time Eli could remember. When he saw Eli, he nodded once and went back to listening. Ross stepped forward and raised a hand, not high, not commanding. The conversations tapered off naturally, like everyone had been waiting for the same breath. "This isn't a meeting," Ross said. "No decisions, no statements." A murmur of agreement passed through the group. "This is a pause," he continued, "for something that ended without finishing anyone off." Eli felt the weight of that settle. Ross turned slightly toward Lena. "You don't owe anyone words." Lena nodded. "I know." Ross's gaze moved to Eli. "And you." Eli shook his head. "I don't want anything." Ross smiled. "Good." He stepped back. What happened next wasn't planned. No signal passed, no cue given. One rider removed his helmet and set it on the ground. Another followed, then another. Not synchronized, not perfect, each choosing the moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, they lowered themselves. Not all at once, not all the way. A bend of the head, a dip of the shoulders, enough to acknowledge without turning it into theater. Eli felt his chest tighten, not from pressure, but from the understanding that this wasn't gratitude. It was recognition. They weren't bowing to a person, they were bowing to restraint. To the moment where power could have taken over and didn't. Lena closed her eyes briefly, breath steady. When she opened them, she looked at Eli, not the riders. "They get it," she said quietly. Eli swallowed. "I didn't do anything special." "I know," she replied. "That's why it matters." The riders straightened again. Helmets lifted. Conversations resumed. The pause ended without dissolving. One rider stepped closer to Eli, older, eyes sharp but kind. "You kept the room from tipping," he said. Eli shrugged. "I didn't know how to fix it." The rider smiled. "You didn't try." That answer stayed with him. As the night thinned, bikes rolled out in twos and threes, engines low, the road taking them the way it always did. Lena waited until the last of them had gone before speaking again. "I'm leaving at dawn," she said. Eli nodded. "I know. You won't hear from me," she added, "unless the road gets loud." He smiled faintly. "I'll be here." She studied his face like she was memorizing something she wouldn't see again. "They'll talk about this for a while. Then forget it," Eli said. She laughed softly. "No, they'll forget the noise, not the stillness." They walked together to the edge of the lot. At the boundary where paths diverged, Lena stopped. "You know why she chose you," she said. Eli looked down. "Because I wasn't moving." "Yes," Lena said, "because you didn't make the world smaller." She extended her hand. This time, he took it first. They stood like that for a breath, nothing else demanded of them. Then she turned and went, the chair rolling smoothly, steadily, away from the light and into the road that didn't need watching anymore. Eli stayed where he was until the night felt ordinary again. He walked home alone, the city fitting around him the way it always had, except now it didn't ask him to disappear. At his door, he paused, hand on the frame, listening. No engines, no knock, just the quiet that comes after something has been properly named. Inside, he set the notebook on the shelf and didn't touch it. Some records didn't need updates, they just needed to exist. The road gave it back to him slowly. Not all at once, not with ceremony, just in the way mornings returned to being mornings. The fence stayed broken. The diner bell kept chiming. The city stopped checking itself every time he moved. Eli woke early on the last day Lena was still in town. He didn't set an alarm. He didn't need one anymore. The habit of listening had become quieter, less sharp. The pressure that once lived in his chest had moved elsewhere, leaving behind something steadier. He found her where he expected to, at the edge of the lot, chair angled toward the street, bag resting by her side like it had already decided to leave. The sky was pale, undecided about color. "You don't wait long," she said. "I don't like endings that linger," he replied. She smiled at that, not sad, complete. They stood together without filling the silence. No one watched, no engines idled. The road didn't test them anymore. "They'll tell this story wrong," Lena said finally. "Yes," Eli replied. "They'll say I was brave," she continued, "or reckless or symbolic." He nodded. "They'll say I was lucky." She turned to him. "What do you think?" "I think you were tired," he said, "and I think I was still." That made her laugh quietly. The sound carried just enough to belong to the morning. Caleb arrived without sound, parking farther back than usual, letting the moment stay small. He didn't interrupt. He just waited, hands in pockets, eyes soft with the kind of respect that didn't ask for acknowledgement. "I'll walk you to the road," Eli said. They moved together, slow and unremarkable, past the places where things had happened and now didn't. The fence, the diner, the corner where engines had once gone quiet. At the edge of town, Lena stopped. "This is where I go forward," she said. Eli nodded. "That makes sense." She looked at him for a long moment. "They asked me again why she chose you." He didn't answer. "I told them the truth," she said, "that you didn't make yourself important. You made space." He looked down at his hands, then back up. "That's not hard." "Yes," she said gently. "It is?" "Most people fill the room without noticing." She extended her hand. Not because she needed it, because she chose it again. He took it. They stood there, neither pulling, neither holding longer than necessary. A clean moment, no witnesses, no weight beyond what they gave it. Then she let go. She turned and rolled toward the road that led away, not looking back, not because she couldn't, but because the choice had already been made and didn't need rehearsal. Caleb cleared his throat softly. "You good?" Eli watched until Lena disappeared around the bend. "Yeah," Caleb nodded. They were in awe. Eli frowned. Of what? Caleb looked at the empty road. Of someone who didn't turn a moment into leverage. They drove back without talking. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been lived. Later that day, the city issued its final update. No press conference, no statements read aloud. Just a quiet closure posted where closures belonged. Eli read it once and didn't save it. He went back to the fence in the afternoon, the place that had become a reference point without asking permission. He sat there for a while, watching shadows change length. Someone had fixed the slat again. This time, properly. He touched the wood and felt nothing special. That felt right. A bike passed, then another. No nods, no pauses. Just people moving through a place that no longer needed watching. As evening came, Eli walked home alone. The notebook stayed on the shelf where he'd left it. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He cooked something simple, ate without distraction, and sat by the window as night settled. The road beyond stretched out, unclaimed by noise or meaning. For the first time since the moment she'd chosen his hand, the world didn't ask him to hold anything. He understood then what the awe had been about. Not strength, not bravery, not destiny. It was about restraint, about the rare ability to stay exactly where you are when everything else demands motion, and to do it without asking for recognition. Eli turned off the light and let the room go dark. Outside, engines moved somewhere far away, not because of him, not because of anything at all. The road went on, and so did he.